You got a best friend?
Yes, sir.
Is he smarter than you?
Yes, sir.
Would you trust him with your life?
Yes, sir.
That's your chief of staff.
Remember when people were romantic about politics? From that scene in the Bartlett West Wing, we transition now, however ungracefully, to the Trump West Wing. The president wants everyone to know that while many people wanted the job and some big names were turned away, he ended up going across the White House driveway to the Office of Management and Budget to find his new chief of staff. The president made the big announcement on Twitter. Mick Mulvaney is his new acting chief of staff. Now, it's believed the acting part of his title is an option he wanted for when it comes time, perhaps, to exit the West Wing. Mulvaney is a former congressman from South Carolina, grew up in the D.C. area, went to Georgetown. This is his third administration role in less than 2 years. Bloomberg's Jennifer Jacobs says she heard from one former Trump administration official who told her, quote, "Nothing shows how hard it is to get people in this administration than this." Just yesterday, the president said the search to replace John Kelly was down to 5, mostly well-known people. Earlier today, Chris Christie took himself out of the running. According to one source, the president was desperate to kill the storyline that nobody wanted the job to be his chief of staff, so he settled on Mulvaney. Not long ago, Trump jumped to defend his pick, writing, quote, "For the record, this is tonight. There were many people who wanted to be the White House chief of staff. Mick M. will do a great job." With us for more tonight, Catherine Lucy, White House reporter for the Associated Press, and Jonathan Allen, veteran political journalist and our NBC News national political reporter. Gang, welcome to you both. Catherine, I can't wait. I have to show you this. This is a clip. What was the date on this, did we decide? November 2nd, 2016. This is your new acting White House chief of staff talking about Donald Trump.
Yes, I'm supporting Donald Trump. I'm doing so as enthusiastically as I can, given the fact I think he's a terrible human being. But the choice on the other side is just as bad.
So, Catherine, how many people wanted this job that is now in the hands of a guy who called the boss a terrible human being?
Well, I think the thing that's been notable with this process all along is how many people have been trying to distance themselves from the job rather than run toward what is typically a big, highly sought after Washington gig. We had a lot of people sort of back channeling that they weren't interested, and some people, publicly, withdrawing their names. Most notably today, the day started looking like former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie was a leading contender. He, declared on Twitter that it was not the right time for him to take the job. We know that Mick Mulvaney was in the White House that afternoon for a meeting on spending legislation, on the wall and the budget, and that then led to this appointment. He had been someone that the president had been looking at. We understand the president does like him, does like he has legislative experience, that he has relationships on the Hill. But certainly an element of this was an effort to get someone into the role and sort of end this speculation about who actually wants the job.
John, the Chris Christie thing never made sense to some people because of that annoying fact that Chris Christie put Jared's dad in federal prison. So let's set that aside. Is it true that Mulvaney's going to try not to resign from OMB? Can you do both jobs at once?
You can't really do both jobs at once, but yes, he can be acting chief of staff at the White House and remain entitled the OMB director. This is an indication of just how bad the White House chief of staff job is, that Mick Mulvaney is keeping his original title, basically a Senate confirmed job, so that he has something to go back to if this doesn't work out. If he left the OMB job, he would have to be reconfirmed by the Senate to go back to OMB, or the White House would have to get somebody else nominated and try to go through that process to replace him at OMB at a time when you've got $1 trillion+ deficits in the middle of a bunch of budget wars. This is a really embarrassing sort of episode for the White House. Normally, a White House chief of staff would be exiting and there'd be somebody pretty much lined up. Normally, you would not have a public rejection of the president by 3 candidates in a row. We had Obviously Chris Christie today. You had Nick Ayers earlier, and
Meadows took himself out of the game.
And Mark Meadows also took himself out of the running. So this is, as Catherine pointed out, the president wanted to end this spectacle as quickly as possible. And also, as she pointed out, Mick Mulvaney having relationships on the Hill is one of the reasons he's attractive to the president. What the president may not know is that Mick Mulvaney's relationships on the Hill are bad, by and large. He does not have relationships with Democrats on the Hill. Most of the moderate and mainstream Republicans on the Hill do not like him, and he was basically relegated to a pretty ideological fringe in the House of so-called Freedom Caucus members, most of whom have not listened to him when he has implored them to vote for budget bills. As the OMB director, often asks him to vote for things that he wouldn't have voted for when he was in Congress. So it's not clear to me that he's going to arrive on Capitol Hill and suddenly start delivering votes for the president's agenda.
Well, Catherine, he's got that going for him, as they say. Catherine, I have seen it speculated that the old saw that Donald Trump is his own chief of staff. If you agree with that, then you have to view this as a shiny object of distraction on a Friday at the end of a terrible week for this West Wing.
Well, I think there is always an element of that, and that maybe, I think, is part of the reason that there has been a difficulty in attracting people to the job, is that at the end of the day, the president really does set the terms, he's making the decisions, and he's only going to take so much advice. So the model where a chief of staff has a tremendous amount of power to influence decision-making or guide it is not going to be the case here. He is really going to, set the tone.
John, in 30 seconds or less, how consequential was this week in your time watching this administration?
It's amazing how they get increasingly consequential, Brian, but this was a pretty consequential week for the White House in terms of what's going on with the various investigations, the SDNY and the Mueller investigation, and, of course, this public spectacle of the chief of staff situation. Tough to find a week that's been much worse for the White House.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.